Now we're going to discuss authentic leadership and ethics, which is often related to the idea of morally sound leadership, or how we really think about good leadership from the idea or the side of it being moral based. For authentic leadership, the primary focus is on whether someone is genuine in their actions or not. The interpersonal definition, which occurs within oneself, is that it's based on your own self concept and how your actions relate to that of your personal self concept. So it relies on your life story and how open and honest you are about to yourself and about your strengths and shortcomings. It's created between the relationship leaders and followers have and whether or not the interactions are natural or faked. And it is a reciprocal process, and it's difficult to be an authentic leader without followers who are also authentic as well. So that's why it really is based on both the leader and the follower. So, who are authentic leaders? Well, they usually have these three characteristics. They exhibit this genuine leadership with their actions that are congruent with their character. They lead from conviction or their own personal beliefs, and they are original in who they are, and they're not a copy and do not mimic the behaviors of others, but rather just demonstrate who they are personally. So there is a developmental definition that really does focus on the idea that authentic leadership can be developed, and it can be developed and nurtured over time, and is grounded in the belief that leadership is a lifelong learning process. So it's okay for someone to be consistently working towards authenticity. Individuals can be triggered by major life events and personality assessments. It's commonly believed that the only way someone's personality will change is through a major traumatic event, and other life's event can impact this as well. So if you consider major different life events at the time, they often do change people, and they change people in a way that can really help to develop authentic leadership. And it's really grounded in someone having a positive psychological qualities and really strong ethical values. It is thought that authentic leadership is based on four components that can be developed over time. The first is self-awareness, or how well you know yourself. The second is internalized moral perspective, which is based on character values and having a moral compass. The next is balanced processing, self-regulatory processing, or a way that helps people stay grounded through problem solving. And then the final is relational transparency, or your ability to be transparent about who you are with those around you. So Bill George is really known for a lot of work on authentic leadership, and he has developed this approach that has five major characteristics. So the first is that people understand their purpose. And the next is that they have strong values and they do the right thing. So their behavior really does match that. The next is that they establish trusting relationships with others, and they have this connectedness when it comes to those that they work with. Then they demonstrate self-discipline and act on their values. So they have consistency when it comes to those types of things. And then finally, they have heart, or they demonstrate compassion because they are passionate about their mission and compassionate to others that they work with. So authentic leadership, when we're thinking about how it works, it's important to remember that it's a complex and developmental process. So it really is one of those things you can work towards and really have a goal of trying to achieve. You might develop a coach or somebody that might help you through that. The next is that it's a practical approach and it's clear and prescriptive. There are five characteristics to being authentic if we follow Bill George's model that really help us to work towards those things if that's something that you want to accomplish or achieve. And the theoretical approach looks at more attributes and the development of those attributes over time. So when we think about those four different attributes that I described as well, self-awareness, internalized moral perspective, balancing processing, relational transparency, again, you can utilize a coach or someone else to help you work towards that over time. The strengths of authentic leadership is that it fulfills an expressed need for trustworthy leadership in society. So there's this void in this uncertain world that we aim to fill, and this helps to fill that. Provides broad guidelines for individuals who want to become authentic leaders and how to work towards that. Similar to transformational and servant leadership, authentic leadership has an explicit moral dimension, which many people really prefer. Authentic leadership emphasizes that authentic values and behaviors can be developed in leaders over time. And then finally, authentic leadership can be measured using the ALQ. So some major criticism that it's still in the formative stages of development, and there are a number of questions that still need to be addressed. The moral component of authentic leadership is not fully explained, so sometimes people have a hard time understanding what is known or seen as higher values or justice in the side of authentic leadership and what might just be a faked authentic leadership. Researchers have questioned whether positive psychological capacity should be included as components of authentic leadership. And then finally, future research be conducted to explore how authentic leadership is related to outcomes. So we know that people prefer leadership that has moral sides of or moral values, and people would prefer to be known as moral leaders. However, there's little to say that that really does lead to better business outcomes. Coupled with this idea when it comes to leadership values and then also the idea of authentic leadership is really leadership ethics. And the word ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, which means customs, conduct, or character, and it's really who we are. So it's mainly concerned with the values and morals of both an individual and then society, and it focuses on the virtues of the individual and their motives for their actions. Kohlberg's stages of moral development have three levels, and the first is pre-conventional level, and it usually is developed between the time of 4 and 10 years old. So stage 1 is when a child learns to obey rules and avoid punishment, and stage 2 is when children base their actions on the consideration of what others can do for them. So they follow rules out of self-interest within these places. That's kind of the you tell a child, like, if you do this for me, I'll give you a cookie, or vice versa. You do something for me, I'll do something for you. Then we transition between the ages of 10 and 13 to conventional level, where stage 3 is really concerned with maintaining relationships, looking for approval of others, and then kind of following that golden rule. And then stage 4, when we transition to this, is really based again on the concern for respecting authority, maintaining social order, and then doing your duty for society. And this is when you begin to consider if something will harm someone else or not. And then finally, when we move to the post-conventional, it's really reached in early adolescence. So, following that conventional level, stage 5 is concerned with the values and the majority of others and the well-being of society overall. And then in stage 6, is looking at what we think is right, even if it conflicts with the law. So this is really when you're starting to develop the idea of universal principles, even if they're not related to currently what society would say or what your social contract says. This model is important is that it's important that we understand how we develop this system of rules or principles, and that it is a developmental process that we engage in. So ethical theory tells us that it's the idea that we have a system of rules and principles as a guide for making decisions about what's wrong and right, and then also what's good and bad. And then it also provides us with the basis for what it means to be a morally decent human. So one of those important pieces is kind of questioning those pieces based on development. However, there are moral standards, and when you talk about different countries and different places around the world, there's places where moral standards are different for different pieces of things. So ethical theory is based on your own system. So this model or ethical theory dictates that individuals do things for the benefit of self-interest and for the benefit of themselves, but that they also do things based on the concern and interest for others. So high self-interest is referred to as ethical egoism, and it's the idea that the person should act with the greatest concern for themselves at all times. Next is altruarianism, and it's based on creating the greatest good for the greatest number, so maximizing social benefits and minimizing social costs. So again, the same idea that it's minimizing costs for you, but maximizing the benefits for others. And then finally, altruism are actions that are only appropriate if they're only for the greater good and benefiting others. So it's really the idea that sometimes it's not about you, sometimes it's about what's going to be better for the most amount of people overall. So the centrality of ethics requires that we have leaders that have an impact on the lives of their followers. Power and control differences create enormous ethical responsibilities for leaders, and it's important that they're ready to take that on. The respect for persons sensitive to followers' own interests and needs is really important. So it's not just about yourself, It's about your followers as well. And then finally, leaders help to establish and reinforce the organizational values and create an ethical climate where all individuals are expected to uphold those set ethical values. In relation to ethical leadership, the toxic triangle is really those three different pieces that can really impact the ethical values of your organization. So the first one is destructive leaders. So this comes in with a negative charisma, which we've talked about how that can be a positive and a negative thing. Personalized power, so power that's really focused on their own benefits. Narcissism, negative life themes in the way that they really do lead their life, and then an ideology of hate. And that really becomes kind of a destructive piece that can really impact the entire group. Next, we have susceptible followers. So there's conformers and concluders. So conformers have unmet needs, low core self-evaluations, and low maturity, and they tend to really just conform to the destructive leader and the destructive environment. And then concluders have ambition, similar worldviews, and bad values as well. So they kind of work with the destructive leader because they do actually agree with them in the way that they kind of see the world. And then conducive environments, really that instability of the environment, a perceived threat, issues with cultural values, or lack of checks and balances, and ineffective institutions, meaning ineffective manner for working through conflict, or the leader's inability to take on the challenge of helping to work through conflict is what kind of influences this unethical environment. Against that toxic triangle, we really want to think through these principles of ethical leadership. There's 5 of them. So respect for others, really showing others respect and treating them as the ends in themselves rather than the ends to a mean. Serving others, so altruistic in nature, and these leaders place the followers' welfare foremost in their plan. Next is that ethical leaders are just, so they make it a top priority to treat all individuals fairly or with equity. Ethical leaders manifest honesty, so they're honest and truthful. And then finally, they build community by working towards a common goal and or shared goals that are developed by all individuals. So authentic leadership and ethical leadership kind of go hand in hand. So how do we apply these? Well, it can be applied to all individuals at all levels of organizations and in all walks of life, because leadership has a moral dimension. Being a leader demands awareness on our part of as the way our ethics define leadership. Managers and leaders can use information on ethics to understand themselves and strengthen their own leadership. Leaders can use ethical principles as benchmarks for their own behavior. And then finally, leaders can learn that leader-follower relationships are central to ethical leadership, and that it's important that there be ethics on both sides.